Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. It's Ukraine war, everything update. Second part of my updates today. It's a little bit crazy because I've had an electrician in and I don't really know what's going on, and I had all these things prepared and then I've had to move everything over to Google Chrome browser so that hopefully you can hear sound. We're going to test this out. It appears I can share sound with you if I use Chrome. Anyway, hello. Let me know in the live chat if you can hear me. There's a few things I want to say on top of what I said earlier on today in my first news piece, and that is just to add on to some of the nuggets I was sharing with you before. And the first one is going to be this. I was talking to you about. Excellent, you can hear me. Brilliant. I was talking to you about Shoigu and about how he, his whole demeanor and his rhetoric has completely changed from the beginning of the war in March last year to now in September 2023. And then I came across the video where he was cut in saying, you know, do you think we'll win? And he went silent and then moved his arms as if to say, hey, I don't know. And anyway, this I think says quite a lot. So I'm not going to play this sound of this, but just going to read out the subtitles because I think this reveals an awful lot, but also read his body language. So I'm going to play it through to actually, no, you can see it live and I'll read out the subtitles.
Как на фронте дела? Можете нам сказать?
So I'm going to just cut off the sound for you. So how are things at the front? And he says, well, I think every day you cover this fairly granular. Look at him looking around. Well, we continue to destroy armor and personnel of all those who are continuing for many months this counteroffensive we went through or passed already. As you remember, the spring offensive, the summer offensive, or right now we have an autumn offensive. Well, it is ongoing right now. And when you see his arms just go up like that, and you'll see in a second that his left hand, look at the way he's sort of twiddling his fingers. This guy, yeah, he might be nervous about being interviewed, but he's a defense minister, right? I think, and he may have been caught off guard with this interview, but I think there's just an awful lot that is communicating that actually things aren't going well, and he's having to kind of lie. There are all the elements of like the shiftiness of his face, etc., that things aren't going well for the Russians. So he says the troops are engaged in keeping an active defense in the needed and necessary directions. Somewhere it's harder, it's easier, but I can say that the guys act confidently. Commanders act confident, his fingers there going at the bottom, and reliably defends that, the translations are great, that today we need to defend. These are naturally the directions where they try to break through Ukrainian armed forces, but the main task is to destroy their equipment. Will we win? We have no other option. Thank you so much. Right, I think that's incredible. So will we win? Shrugs his shoulders, we have no other option. Rather than, yes, we're definitely going to win, we're absolutely smashing and we're doing this. Everything he said was just suitably vague and without any real substance. And if your defense minister is saying that, I think that belies the real situation for the Russians on the front line. And I'd be interested if you think that as well. Am I reading too much into this? You look at the body language, you look at his face, you look at the way he speaks. I mean, I didn't play the sound there, but he's not particularly confident. And he says just essentially meaningless twaddle. So there is that. Then I want to add on to what I said earlier about Russian ships being hit, and I said it could be open season going on for the Russians now in their Black Sea fleet. We have seen that in the Western Cape of Crimea, we have seen air defense systems getting taken out. We're in a situation where the Russians have shown they are vulnerable in Crimea, and Sevastopol is vulnerable, and the Black Sea Fleet are, by extension, vulnerable. We have seen naval drones being used with greater abandoned by the Ukrainians. And there was a report that 2 patrol ships and then a corvette. And here we have Russian Ministry of Defense reporting this morning. So this is another one that the armed forces of Ukraine unsuccessfully, of course, tried to attack another Black Sea Fleet ship using a naval drone. It's a Karakurt class Project 22800 corvette Askold. So it's a warship capable of launching caliber cruise missiles, and that is really, really significant. If the Ukrainians can take out ships, or at least constrain the use of these ships, the ships that can fire cruise missiles at Ukraine, then that's a really good news for the Ukrainians. So right, and the next thing before we go on to the front line is this one, and hopefully you will be able to hear the sounds of this. This is just nuts. So what we have is, this looks like a kind of Ring doorbell type thing where we have a woman, and I presume that's her kid over there on the right. You can't see, oh, you can see my mouse. That's brilliant. So that's the kid on the right. As she comes up to the doorbell, here is a soldier back from the front line. And what happens is he asks the boy to unpin a grenade. And the boy refuses to unpin a grenade, so he does it himself and chucks a grenade. I mean, we're in the middle of a residential neighborhood here.
Аня, все, порвем? Давай. Не надо. Нет, вы туда впустите. Она двухшумовая. Будет громко, сигнализация. Так кидаем или нет? Нет. Да? Нет, не надо. Кидай, не кидай. Я ручки разорву. Иди выдергивай. Ну выдерни, а я брошу. Ты что, блядь, а? Ебанутый, сука, блядь! Блядь, иди нахуй, блядь! Ты чё, уёбок? Она двухшумовая. Да мне похуй, ёпта! Ладно, извини. Сука! Извини, пожалуйста. Тварь, блядь! Извини, пожалуйста. Тварь, блядь, таких убивать!
Just and so it goes on. I mean, just insane. As she rightfully is absolutely going nuts at him. The guy's just unpinned a grenade and chucked it in the middle of a residential neighborhood. What is going on? And as people are saying, oh, it's just normal day in the life of Russians. Just an insane bit of footage, that. Anyway, that's just the odd bits and pieces I wanted to share with you from added on to this morning. So we're going to go to the front line at the moment. Where should we go to first? Let's go to here. I have to share each individual tab, so it's a little bit annoying, but if I forget, let me know and I'll probably ignore you because I can't see it. Anyway, so here we have the map of the front line without all the constituent parts. So just to remind you what everything means, I have defensive lines on this map. Many colors represent different mappers, and these are the defensive lines for the Russians. So this is where they are pushed back to or attacking from. There will be a gray zone in front of these lines and towards the Ukrainian lines. It doesn't go Russian controlled and then Ukrainian controlled. So there will be a gap and then Ukrainian robust control after that. So anyway, these mappers, the blue line that represents Andrew Perpetua, a kind of objective, pro-Ukrainian, morally speaking, but a really objective mapper. We have Suryat Maps that seems to toe the party line for the Russian MOD, very pro-Russian mapper. And the white line is where the Russians were from the beginning of the counteroffensive, as according to Deep State map. And then we have some yellow ones later on. So anyway, we're going to start in the northeastern sector, the axis going from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna here. Now, there's not too much to report. The ISW says something that I think is worthy of note. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malia stated that the intensity of fighting and the number of recent combat engagements in the Kupiansk and Liman directions has decreased because Russian forces are gathering forces, presumably for further operations. And I don't know whether that means further operations in the area or further operations elsewhere. But nonetheless, there's not too much to report from the northeast. Yes, there will be repelled attacks from differing in differing areas here. So we'll just move on really to on the way to Bakhmut, but not quite there, because actually both mappers show some success for the Ukrainians. Indeed, Deep State Map does, but I don't show their recent map. I do actually. The yellow line here is Deep State Map starting actually just after where we're talking about. So all the mappers seem to say that the Russians have made some gains in the Vasily area towards this settlement called Vasily, and that is, I guess, a bit of an issue for the Ukrainians. Just trying to work out what the Russians are doing, because they don't seem to be concentrating on any one point particularly. I mean, previously we had seen them work quite hard to the west of Svatova. Whether that's a hole that's now being plugged by the Ukrainians in defense, but that seems to have quietened down. We've seen some stuff going on in Sinkivka, but it's not overly worrying. And then we have activity going on in the usual places, in the forest and whatnot. And then suddenly places pop up here, and you're thinking, is this you trying to do that kind of deep battle tactic that we use in offense, but use it for defensive reasons, like prodding and probing in order to exploit some weakness, exploit that weakness to a degree that you can with what you've got, in order to make the Ukrainians go, there's a problem over here. We need to redirect some of our defensive resources over to plug that gap, so on and so forth. But it goes back to what I've said to you many times before, which is, well, surely it's more sensible. These troops are more needed in some of the hot areas on the front line in the south, for example, or maybe around Bakhmut. So it's just trying to work out what the rationale is. But anyway, that's taken place in the north there. We're going to go to Syriac maps to have a look at some of the claims here from Syriac maps. So we'll go to the area of Vasily, which is here, Bilahorivka, which is a southern Bilahorivka, not the one up by the forest. So the situation on the eastern front, Russian army has managed to make new advances west of Bilahorivka and is slowly approaching Vasily from the east. So that is a claim there. Then we have some other claims from them. Right, before we go to the south of Bakhmut, I'm going to give you a general appraisal of what's going on from Kenneth Gregg, and then we can get into the details of what's going on in Klishchivka and Andriivka. Sorry, I'm a bit all over the place. It's just going live this quickly. Right, Kenneth Gregg, so he's a Finnish fighter in Ukraine who's not on the front line at the moment. He's doing more charitable work. So the Russians had some success yesterday at Vasily. So that's where we just talked about, where they have taken some of our positions. However, they had withdrawn from Andriivka and established a strong defense line behind the railway in the double forest belt. This has been expected for about a week now. So it's not a breakthrough for our people, since we have the heights and flanks around Andriivka. The Russians have been exposed to our artillery. The fact that they did not withdraw earlier resulted in unnecessary losses. We're going to come on to that in a second. At Opitny, so this is in the Avdiivka area, fighting is ongoing and our troops have advanced into the western edges of the community. We have also attacked Novomayorsky, so that's southern front line, and have partial success, and the overall picture of the attack is still unclear. Our forces improved their positions near Verbove, and that's in the Robotyne area. Russian drones targeted our troops south of Robotyne, showing that we have progress in the area. Our tanks advanced towards the Russians' fortified positions east of Novoprokopivka and reached the nearby tree line. The Russians had reinforced with the 7th Airborne Assault Division and now have all their elite troops in active combat. Despite all the reinforcements, we are advancing meter by meter and will take the opportunity when it presents itself. The enemy troops are very tired. This will lead to mistakes and we will exploit them immediately. In addition, our guerrilla troops and the local resistance are working extremely well in the Tokmak and Melitopol area. The same goes for our missile troops. So there you go. That is just a summary, and we'll touch on all those areas and aspects as we go forward. So let's now start with just to say, I did forget Romanov, who I've not heard from some days. I was saying I wonder what's happened to him. There were rumors of him having an arrest warrant. He's a Russian mill blogger who speaks the truth, a bit like Evil Gherkin. He said that the Russians have not taken Sinkivka, so that's that town to the north where, sorry, I'm going all over the shop. That's that town to the north near Kupiansk. That there were there have been claims it's been surrounded. Russian claims, yes, some claims that it had been taken. He's just saying no, it hasn't been taken. So just putting that. That's sorry, I wasn't showing you the map there. So let's show this instead. So the Sinkivka is up near Kupiansk. The idea is that that may have been surrounded and taken by the Russians, but Romanov, who's generally quite reliable when he's saying kind of things that are to the advantage of the Ukrainians, he's saying that it's not been taken. And this is what I often call enemy attestation. So when someone from the other side makes a claim that is not to the benefit of them, then it carries a little bit more weight in terms of reliability. Right, so we're going to now go to Bakhmut. This is we're hearing the news, and it's coming out now. It's taking up quite a lot of bandwidth that the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade of Ukraine has liberated Andriivka. So if you remember from yesterday, we had the situation where Andriivka, oh goodness me, what am I doing? Andriivka is to the south of Bakhmut near Klishchivka. We have the settlement of Klishchivka, that longer settlement that goes to the east of the higher ground on the ridge, which sits to the west with the entrenchments on top. So Klishchivka, we'll talk about that in a second, has taken up a lot of the news. But Andriivka as well. Yesterday, Hanna Maliar, the Deputy Defence Minister, announced that it had been liberated. Then pretty much straight away afterwards, the 3rd Assault Brigade said, no, it hasn't been liberated. Please don't say stuff like this. It's really kind of dangerous. It doesn't really help. However, and I know Matt's just online to help me in a second. I'll be with him soon. However, it has now been liberated. So literally like half a day later, it turns out that Andriivka has been liberated, and Hanna Maliar might possibly have been correct, or might have been jumping the gun, or not got clearance to say that, even though she is Deputy Defence Minister. Anyway, it now appears to be in the hands of the Ukrainians. And just before I bring Matt Bishop on to help me out with the kind of live chats and whatnot, let's just go through the Andriivka stuff, which if we can see from here from Defmon, the liberation of Klishchivka and Andriivka. I was going to say we're going to come on to Klishchivka. That the Klishchivka claim has come later than the Andriivka one. So the first one out was that Andriivka has been liberated by the Ukrainians. It's worth having well, we'll come on to Klishchivka in a second. I'm going to start with Andriivka, and there's been these announcements of what has gone on here. So Ukraine's 3rd Storm Brigade on the Bakhmut front says it has encircled and routed Russia's 72nd Brigade. So if you remember when I said earlier, the 72nd Brigade are these guys that got that ran away during the beginning of the counteroffensive back in sort of June time, when Wagner pulled out. The 72nd, one of the units that replaced them, but then kind of ran away and gave up loads of hard-fought positions that Wagner had spilled a lot of blood in taking. And so Prigozhin, when he was alive, absolutely ripped into the 72nd. Well, they've been still operational in the area, and apparently they were encircled and routed. 3 battalion commanders were killed. Russian brigade's intelligence chief was killed, and lots of equipment apparently was also taken in a 2-day operation. The translation of what has taken place is here. I think this is this the best one to go through? Yeah. So the 3rd Assault Brigade has now sent out confirmation that they are in control of Andriivka after a 2-day-long battle. So as a result of a lightning operation, the Russian garrison of Andriivka was surrounded, cut off from the main forces, and destroyed. In 2 days, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade eliminated the chief of the brigade in intelligence of the enemy, 3 combatants. I think that's probably more than 3 people, and almost all the infantry. So I think that means 3 commanders. And almost all the infantry of the 72nd Brigade, together with officers and a significant amount of equipment. So other translations has that as commanders, I remember now. So that's the chief of intelligence, 3 commanders, and a load of officers and all the infantry. And of now, the fighting continues. Our units continue to consolidate in new positions. Therefore, about the specific numbers of dead and wounded enemy and other most interesting details of the operation that will come later. We emphasize that the units of the 72nd of the Russian Federation repeatedly suffered heavy losses and defeats from clashes with the 3rd Assault Division earlier, and I talked about that with them running away. Now, after recovering and regrouping, the enemy has suffered a total failure. The capture and holding of Andriivka is our way of a breakthrough on the right flank from Bakhmut and the key to the success of all further offensives. I think that's really important, that we pay a high price for the results of these battles, and the blood of each of our fighters will be repaid only with blood. So I think that's an important thing to end with, because I think any of these victories that come for Ukraine will come at a high cost to Ukraine. But I think here's another example of almost certainly a ratio that's far more in favor of the Ukrainians than the Russians. I think the Ukrainians have probably lost the Russians have lost an awful lot of troops there, as is claimed. Right, I'm bringing Matt on to help me a little bit, because sometimes, hey Matt, sorry, I have go and check out live streams from my previous, live streams. Click on the live tab on my channel, and you can check out an interview with Matt. He was living in Kharkiv. You might know as Saberint on the threads, and he escaped through Romania and back to Australia with his Ukrainian wife. So and family, a son as well. So thank you, Matt, for coming to help me. I don't know how this is going to work, but sometimes when I'm struggling to find things, you can just pitch in.
Well, first of all, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. I had mic problems. So, hi everyone.
Hello.
Yeah. And
awesome.
if anyone in chat has questions, I can see the chat this time I'm here. So, yeah, I can always try and answer questions if I know the answers.
Yeah, just field some questions my way as well. Just help us understand what the questions are, and any that you can answer too is fabulous. That's brilliant. Thanks, mate, for doing this. I'm just going to just carry on with this kind of Klishchiivka area. So let's go to this tab. This is just to make sure you're not too much in the way of it. No, that should be all right. Okay, so this is what Klishchiivka is like. You can hear background explosions. I'm going to turn the sound down a little bit. In fact, I'm actually going to turn the sound off, but so I can talk. So here we have Klishchiivka, and as you can see, it is pretty much destroyed. And we are hearing now that Klishchiivka is fully liberated, as well as Andriivka, which is significant for the Ukrainians. And indeed, if we want to look at further evidence of the complete destruction, I mean, you can see the rubble of houses around, all the hallmarks of war, trees stripped of their foliage, so on and so forth. So that is Klishchiivka, and Andriivka is here. Just make that a little bit bigger. So this is the tiny town that they've been fighting over, and I think that is, I mean, it's typical of these frontline settlements where they just get absolutely wrecked. So just to go back to the map, give you guys an idea of where that picture is. That is this settlement here. That is between a road there going up to Klishchiivka and between the railway lines. And the talk is that the Russians have pulled out from Andriivka and from Klishchiivka back to the railway line. I don't know if that's the case at Andriivka. It's very close, obviously, to the town itself. But yeah, just to go back to that image, this is the sort of place that they fight over. It's just such a sad state of affairs. I'm sure, Matt, you would have been. You will have seen places. Have you been to Andriivka?
Yeah. We used to have an office in Donetsk many years ago before the revolution, and so I know the area, and you can't look at it and not, cry. That's the only word, because that was someone's home, and not just their home of 30 years, because a lot of these are small villages where people have spent their whole life, and and that's all their worldly possessions there. And it's just, I often say it, have a walk down the road, look at everything there, just imagine it gone. And that's honestly what it's like. And so you see this, you see the liberation, you feel joy, then you stop and you see what remains, and it's just devastating.
That's a really
So
great point. Just go and have a look outside and imagine that being rubble. We hear so often about how the most vulnerable are the last to leave these sort of places, and that when they're having fighting in places like Robotina, when that was liberated, and there were still people there, and people in Bakhmut until the very end, and you're thinking, how are you still there? And for a lot of the most vulnerable people, mentally ill, physically ill, old, infirm, people with no friends and family left, so on and so forth, these are the people who are really poor. These are the people that can't leave or have got nowhere to go to. Like, I don't know anywhere else. I can't leave and go to the other side of the country because everything I have is here, and so they opt to stay. But then, in staying, your house, your home, your life is reduced to rubble. It's desperately sad, isn't it?
it is. And yeah, look, the important bit there is, if you've lived there for, and I usually say this in the context of my father-in-law, both of his wife and his long-term partner are now buried in Kharkiv. His whole life has been in Kharkiv. Where's he going to go? What's he going to do? He's 70 plus, and it takes a lot of energy to start again. And sometimes it's easier to choose not to start again. And if you die, well, you're going to be dead. You're not going to know about it. So
Yeah.
it's not a great choice for the people involved there.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. Just to go back to the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, there is the claim, of Hannah Maliar making the Andreevka liberation claim and then retracting it. And then here, I just want to talk about this. So Pushilin, the DNR head, the Donetsk People's Republic head, denied reports that Ukrainian forces liberated Andreevka, well, it has been now, and claimed that Russian forces improved unspecified positions near Andreevka. Well, they might have improved them near there, but not in there. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces conducted unsuccessful attacks near Bodanivka, which is further to the north. And another mill blogger claimed that Russian forces defending south of Bakhmut do not have enough personnel to conduct rotations. And this is something that we hear of so often, that they don't have the strength and depth to do these rotations. And when they do these rotations, it's often not a rotation. Actually, it's just reinforced with other forces from somewhere else on the front line. So we heard, sometime recently that there were troops going from Bakhmut down to sort of Robotina area. There are the Kremina, the troops from Kremina going to Robotina as well. Are they being taken from the front line to shore up other areas of the front line? Well, quite possibly, and that's hardly rotation. Some of these troops are exhausted. Now, it's not to say it's not difficult for the Ukrainians, but these Russians are getting the rough end of the stick, I think, and it just shows that they don't have the strength in depth. So yeah, that's just to reconfirm then that Klishchiivka has been apparently liberated as well. So both of these settlements being liberated is really, I think, important for the Ukrainians, because that means that the Russians are likely to pull back, I think, to this defensive line along the road, and it probably means that Kurdyamivka is next on the list there, and Ozaryanivka might be vulnerable too from the south, as the Ukrainians are pushing up there. However, the front line is a bit of a mix of outcomes for both sides. As we can see, there are areas where Russia are doing well. There are areas like the south of Bakhmut where the Ukrainians are doing well, and there are areas on the southern front where it's just difficult for everyone, and it's really ground to almost a halt. What are your thoughts about, just generally, Matthew, about how do you feel about the counteroffensive? Like, what are your intuitive remarks?
Right, so I'll just go right back to the very beginning. Ukraine was expected by all the experts to last 3 days. What Ukraine's done without adequate weapons is stop one of the world's biggest militaries. It's slowly getting drip fed, mainly out of date weapons. It's got some newer weapons. But look, even Ukraine's desperate for F-16s, which are what, 30, 40-year-old airframes, 40-year-old airframes. So yeah, Ukraine's doing amazingly well. When you really stop and analyze what they're doing, they're doing the only thing possible. They're going, okay, so we die from artillery. That's what the Russian army's based on. We've been concentrating on artillery for the last 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is. Now Russia's lost the advantage in artillery, whether it's they don't have the ammunition or whether it's the fact that, let's be honest, if you're a Russian artillery officer or something, you're firing your gun and moving as quickly as possible to stop the counter battery fire. So I think they're just on the tipping point of starting to push hard now. I think Russia's pretty much, lost their advantage which they had, which people forget, with and is often said, like the corruption in Ukraine or something is, some of the main roads in Ukraine were randomly upgraded and no one could work out how they actually got, ticked off and given permission to be upgraded. And then you look later on and it's like, oh yeah, that's why. That's the road that the Russian tanks took, and so you've suddenly got all this weird stuff coming together now that we've seen many, many years later. But Russia's planned for this for 8 years, so Ukraine's held them, and yeah, now it's slowly pushing them back, and it's going to take time.
Yeah, and I think really when you have to do what you normally do with a massive, air force. So when you look at the number of sorties that the Ukrainians have done over the course of the war, something like 14,000 sorties, and you think, oh, that sounds like a lot, and actually, the Allied forces in Desert Storm, I think, were doing 2,000 a day, and 14,000 would have taken them 2 weeks. So the Ukrainians have done a year and a half of sorties, and they've only achieved doing the amount of sorties that the Allied forces in Desert Storm would have done in 2 weeks. So they are having to do all of the suppression of enemy air defenses, destruction of enemy air defense work with artillery, with their own artillery, with HIMARS, with all bits and pieces that they can cobble together. And that means it will take longer. And I think, as I've said before, they've stepped back from doing these big attacks like they did initially in the Robotyne area and the Orikhiv area, where they lost a bunch of equipment and said, right, that's the wrong way of doing it. We're going to do it our way, a kind of hybrid NATO Ukraine way. And we are going to sit back and just trip the Russians, fix them in places, and then, take it from there. But so I think is very much a different situation. Yeah,
I was going to say it really is. It's. I mean, we look at it as Westerners with the technology advantage that we've got. We spend a hell of a lot of money creating advanced weapons. Ukraine doesn't have this. Ukraine's been drip-fed weapons. They're doing the best they can. It is going to take time. It is going to cost lives, unfortunately. But Ukraine, I don't think will stop. I think even if you find that countries start to pull out, looking at potential US with the elections and things like that, Ukraine's not going to stop. Ukraine's still going to keep fighting. They've been trying for 8 years to get rid of the Russian elements out of their country. They're just not going to stop. And people seem to forget or just don't even realize that Ukraine was occupied for 80 years by Russia. And the crimes, whether you want to go as the first or second biggest genocide in the world, you can argue that one, mainly because the Nazis kept records, but the Russians didn't keep records. So, the numbers are quite comparable. So there's been this massive control, and Ukraine's seen what happens if they give in to Russia. You see the people in LNR and DNR, they've almost lost all the males now. They see what happens if they give in to Russia. So why would they give in to Russia?
Yeah. And I'm going to get to Frederick's questions a little bit later in our military aid points, but thank you very much for those questions. And also thank you to Gary Rollinson Rollinson. So really appreciate that, Gary. Legendary performance. Thank you very, very much. So anyway, as we come down to now south of Bakhmut, we come to Donetsk. Haven't heard too much about what's taking place in Donetsk. We've heard quite a bit about Opitny, about the Ukrainians having some success there, but then the Russians having some success maybe to the northeast of Avdiivka, but not too much information, no changing of the mappers today. So let's just have a look at some information. No, I don't have any more information on that area. The ISW doesn't say anything other than just repelled attacks, the normal kind of thing. But it does talk about Mariinka here, saying, which is tough. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces conducted 14 successful attempts. That was actually early yesterday that was reported to push Ukrainian forces out of positions near Mariinka. And Hanamalia has said that Russian forces have significantly increased the number of attacks around Avdiivka and Mariinka. So there does seem to be this kind of push and shove about where the Ukrainians are being pressured, where the Ukrainians themselves are pressuring. It's not consistent. It's not like it's all happening here, it's all happening there, it's all happening in Bakhmut. There are these other places, some of them like where we've traditionally seen a lot of activity, like Mariinka, but other places on the front line, like we're seeing now in Bilohorivka, and like we're seeing in the northeastern sector. So it is quite dynamic as a front, even though in many ways it's very static, as in where we do have these hotspots. I think it's quite grinding and attritional. I think the Ukrainians really have taken a step back. I think that is particularly the case in Velika Novosilka, where they've kind of gone back to regroup here. They might have had some fairly challenging times here, as they have in Robotyne, and lost some significant numbers of people and equipment, although the Russians will have been losing more, I think. But rather than, refit, get ready to go again, I think they're sitting back and letting the artillery do it, and then just sending out probing attacks here and there. So that's what we've seen in Novomayorsk, where they're sending out sort of company or two, platoon or two even of troops into like the north of the Novomayorsk, make a bit of ground, find out a bit of what's going on, but then when they come under pressure, maybe pull back and go again somewhere else. That's the sense I get around here. There's no great attack taking place in Velika Novosilka. There is some gains, as according to Andrew Perpetua's mapping, only very slight gains just from that rectangle, just pushing that corner in a little bit just north of Priutny, but really not a lot to report from Velika Novosilka. And so we come on to the Robotyne area, where there's potential bit of rejig, tiny bit of land rejig by Andrew Perpetua just there, but essentially no changes to Robotyne. Let's go and have a look at some of the sources, and we'll share this. So Vasilivka, Robotyne area. So Vasilivka is to the west of where this map is, next to the Zaporizhia reservoir. So no confirmed map changes. Ukrainian attacks towards Kopany. So Kopany is to the, and I'll show you on my map in a second, to the northwest of Robotyne and Novoprokopivka. So they're attacking towards there. West of Robotyne are reported by Russian sources. It's reported or unconfirmed that Ukraine took an important height southeast of Robotyne, making an advance towards Novoprokopivka more favorable. I mean, that is something that has been claimed for quite a long time, or has been claimed previously, quite some time ago. So if I share the map again, we have this high ground, hill to the southeast, and that's the only one I can think that they're talking about here, which is sort of about 160-meter hill somewhere around here that they've been fighting. You can see the height changing as I move my mouse around. So yeah, there it is, about 160 meters. So if they've taken control of that hill, which you can see all the mappers seem to think that's the edge of the Russian defensive line, then that will be quite significant, because it will help them taking the rest of the trench network, the manned trenches that go between Verbove and Novoprokopivka, and will help them have sighting all around and give them an advantage for taking on Novoprokopivka from the east. We've heard that There's fighting on the outskirts. We heard previously in Novoprokopivka. The Ukrainians had some success to the north, clearing out all the trench lines there, but it does take an awful long time. When you see some of these combat videos and you realize that, you know, they can be fighting a couple of days for just a small tree line here and a dugout there, you realize that actually it is so attritional and so painstaking, the attacks, partly because they're not doing, and this I'd be interested to see what you say about this, Matthew, but NATO advised them to absolutely pile in to places like Robotna, to kind of overwhelm it, to have this kind of big punch through. And once you may lose a lot of troops, but once you get through, you break through and then job done. They don't seem to be doing that. They seem to be sitting back now, using a lot of artillery like we talked about before, and really using a kind of conservative number of troops to do this. I mean, you're no military expert. I'm no military expert, you know, so to speak. So, but nonetheless, what are your thoughts about what they could do and should do?
Okay, so all I can do is really say what I get back from my friends. They said they followed NATO doctrine at the very beginning, and of course everything got blown up. Someone might say, but they were following too closely or something like that. And it's like, well, the first vehicle gets hit by a mine, you're going to have problems, you know. So they've completely changed their approach now. They're taking their time. I think they're going to be a lot more aware than any of us what the weather's going to be like in that area. And I think they're going to do a very hard push in the last 2 weeks before the rain kicks in, because the rain's going to stop as well Russia being able to get its ammunition to the front line or anything like that. And I think they'll be preparing non-armored assault groups that can actually push forward. And if they can manage that and maybe come up with some like drone tech to drop small arms, ammunition, food, things like that, Ukraine's definitely going to have the advantage to be able to push through. The minefields were devastating. Everyone knew that. Everyone knew that it's was going to be a problem, apart from the media or the mainstream media, who really still have not truly explained it, or I've never seen, whether it's the BBC or someone else, actually just point out the fact that you've got 500 meters of minefields and that they're mixed mines, and that there's just no way, and snipers and artillery and all that covering these minefields as an explanation. Rather than that, they're just trolling out all these experts that's saying, oh, the offensive is going slowly. Well, I don't believe that. Again, as I said, I think they're using a bit more intelligence. They understand that they've got limited options. They don't have 500 aircraft to just bomb everyone. And so they've got to be smart. And what they've really done is, whilst they're pushing in just one area, you'll notice they're following the main road. So they do have good resupply. And I think they'll still keep pushing straight down the main road, and just keep fanning out to the side there. I don't think they're going to try and push all the way down to the sea at this point. And I think you will probably see an attack to the west of the power plant as soon as it starts to freeze. So that's kind of my thought.
Interesting. So the power plant over here, Anohadar.
Yep.
So to the what you think? What across?
Yeah, I think right. Basically, right where your cursor is there, because there's a tricky bit in my mind where Ukraine really has to. That the power plant is always going to be a problem, and so I think they can attack it, but they have to, you know, cut it off at the head. And the best way to do that is to come down just to right where your cursor is, coming down there. They can come through and cut down the supply roads. They've got a chance of actually getting the Russians in there to surrender.
I mean, the challenge there is back last November they tried to do an amphibious assault across here, and it was a bit of a disaster because it worked out. It turned out that Anohadar was super heavily defended with an awful lot of equipment, etc., etc. So they had
And
to
it
kind of
still
do a
is.
UE. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. It will be a difficult nut to crack. There's no doubt
So
about that.
I think that their best bet is to surround it and just say, well, surrender, or you're gonna trigger off a nuclear explosion. But I don't think they've got much of a choice there, and I think that's the really worrying thing for Ukraine. I think they've been really avoiding putting too much pressure on the Russian forces in that area for fear, because Russia's, well, they're saying that the reports are coming in that they've mined it and things like that. So people say, well, you can't necessarily believe it, but hey, I've had dealings with Russians for many years, and I believe it. So
now, I've never been noticed in a supermarket apart from by old Doris that I used to work with, maybe at the co-op or whatever. So, this is I've almost won life. Just had a delivery. Guy heard John chatting on on my speakers. He says, "Is that ATP?" I said, "Yes." Amazing! That is like the coolest thing. Thank you so much for letting me know.
I asked if he tipped him, but I didn't see the reply. So.
And this, so Logan Schmick says, tanks have no place in modern warfare. This is a kind of a trope that's been going around pretty much since the beginning of this war. There's been an awful lot of people and some analysts saying, tanks are obsolete, but most people seem to say tanks are definitely not obsolete. They just need to be used correctly in combined arms warfare. The challenges, of course, are going to concern drones, right? So throughout the first kind of 2/3 of this war, drones were being used to drop IEDs from above, and they were often dropping on tanks. And even people like Elon Musk, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but was saying that tanks are obsolete because you can take out a whole tank with like just a very cheap drone and IED. But as was pointed out a lot back when people were making this claim, actually the bulk of the tanks that were having things dropped in their hatches were already abandoned. So it's not like an IED, like a little hand grenade dropped out of off a drone, is going to take out a tank. However, since then, we've seen first-person view drones having RPGs attached to them that can take tanks out. And so I think there is definitely a challenge for all mechanized equipment and for all soldiers on the front line. There's definitely is all going to be going forward about dealing with low cost, high volume threats like first person view drones with munitions, sizable munitions on board. So I think tanks aren't obsolete. You need to use them correctly, and they are definitely necessary in decent combined arms maneuvers. But they are increasingly vulnerable. But everything is increasingly vulnerable in this era of drone warfare. I don't know if that's you have anything to say to that.
Oh, about tanks? No, you still need them. They protect people. Sorry, I was looking at the chat where you were talking.
Yeah, no worries. No, thanks, by the way, thanks to Brian Ivy. Really, really appreciate that. Very kind of you. There's lots of chat going on. Thank you for all of your active chat in the live chats. And Eubanks DVD, such a great supporter as well. Launches aside, why wouldn't the UK or US send Tomahawk missiles when they're in large supply given the Block V upgrade?
I was just researching that one. That's where my attention was. Very simply because the range is too far. They can hit Moscow from Ukraine, and that will put it into nuclear escalation territory. So yeah,
that's a great question. The US particularly are very guarded on what they give to Ukraine in terms of the range any ordnance has, because they're afraid of that kind of escalation. And so it's that's why HIMARS were a bit iffy, and then it was geofencing the tech. So there was talk about if they give ATACMS, then they might have to change the software and whatnot on board the GIMLers on board the guided multiple launch rocket systems that fire HIMARS. At the moment, you can change the pod to fire from firing kind of 6 HIMARS to firing 1 ATACMS, but they might well be geofenced so that they can't fire too far. and into certain places. So the Americans are really, really cognizant of that issue. So I think you're absolutely right. That would be one of the main reasons. But great
I've
question.
just
And thanks, Evans.
the range is 1,666 plus kilometers, and it actually says the exact range is classified. I love the fact that they came up, left a 666 in there.
Devilishly good.
Yes.
Right. So going back to the front line, there isn't too much more to say about the front line other than this. I thought this was interesting news coming out yesterday that the Ukrainian authorities have announced the evacuation of the civilian population from some villages in the Kherson region. Now, we had heard this previously some time back about this. Well, no, actually, we'd heard the Russians do this in the Zaporizhia region with like 18 different places, but I don't know whatever happened with that. But the Ukrainians making this call, and I think there's talk about children specifically, could be significant. It could be prescient, or it could foreshadow an attack coming across the Dnipro River. Perhaps I don't know, or it could just signify that the Russians are battering these places with artillery. I don't know the rationale behind that, but it would be quite cool to think that the Ukrainians could attack across Dnipro. It's been something we've been talking about quite a bit, but it also could be psyops to make the Russians think that, fix some of their troops and defenses in this area, and then not end up doing anything. But I don't know. Would you favour an attack across Dnipro?
I personally do. I'm very interested to know, because last year the Russians could, using the dam, keep the water flowing fast enough to stop it freezing. This year it's going to be really, really interesting because there's going to be limited water. What there is going to freeze. Normally, like if you're talking the rivers in Ukraine, you're talking up to about a foot and a half of ice. So
right, I was going to ask, like, surely that's not enough to sustain a tank, but it probably might be enough to sustain maybe a Humvee or something.
It is if you use spreading material, and I'm it's not my field of engineering, but you see a lot of the pontoons and things like that where they've actually, they're just spreading the weight out, and so any material there that can just spread the weight, that they could lay across it, they could. But again, you only need tanks if you're facing tanks.
Yeah.
If you've got dug-in infantry and you've got artillery coming over the back, you don't necessarily need a tank or anything like that, especially to get the foothold.
So I mean, I would say that
run
with
troops
combined,
across in the night.
if you can get artillery to do that, but it'd be useful for combined maneuvers to have tanks.
Oh yeah,
but yeah, absolutely.
It's a lot easier, the attack, if you've got the tanks there, but you don't necessarily need the tanks. I mean, you look at the World War I difference between the attacks when they didn't have tanks and they did have tanks. They were a lot more successful with tanks, but they still did it without tanks.
Yeah. So Suryat Mats, a pro-Russian mapper, talks about Pervomaysky Island that I mentioned yesterday. This is a confirmation from their point of view that this island has fallen into the hands of the Ukrainians, been liberated. It's in control of that island. Important to note, Pervomaysky is a key point at Dnipro Liman for a hypothetical and future landing operation on Kinburn Spit, which is exactly what I said yesterday. And I think this is both pretty important to see the Ukrainians take this, and it could talk about their intentions going forward, landing on Kinburn Spit and then moving up the peninsula possibly. I can't see that they would bother taking it for any other reason other than to maybe stop the Russians having it, to stop the Russians maybe being able to do things across the estuary. But at the same time, it's also quite small and it just sticks out like a sore thumb as a kind of potential target for the Russians to hit with their own artillery. So, it's a double-edged sword, really.
It would just be about observation points, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
observation, or being able to have one or two drone controllers sitting there because they've got that bit further range.
Yeah,
something like that.
I mean, you've got, the drone could be interesting. You've got, say, that's a 20-kilometer range. Now, it seems to me that Russian artillery doesn't really have the range that it should have. I think their barrels have been worn. I think the situation's pretty dire for their artillery, so that's why they bring in closer. It's my guess. I think that the days of them consistently having artillery that can hit maybe 30 kilometers is not there. So you'd have to have artillery down at the end of the peninsula to be able to do that, but I think they've got that. The Ukrainians, as far as I understand it, have spent a long time trying to do counter battery fire along here to stop the Russians, from using their artillery here to hammer places like Ochakiv. Ochakiv has been hit quite consistently. It's got some sort of marina kind of port areas. I think there's a couple of Marines training bases there, or at least there used to be, and so it has taken a bit of a hit from the Russians previously. Right, now that's the end of the Frontline update. Is there anything you wanted to add to the Frontline?
No, I just wanted to say Lost in France just did an interesting comment where he said, oh, wow, China looks like they're about to ban Tesla. No wonder Musk is in full grovel mode. I'd love to know more on that one. Have you done your research on that one, JP?
No, I haven't, mate. I've been so crazy busy today. But goodness me, I don't want to. Whenever I say anything about Musk, half the people go, "Yeah, you're bang on, dodgy character, etc., etc." Half the people you have no right to say anything about Musk. He's like, you can't touch him, and damn you, damn you don't. But suffice to say, he is a really important character. I mean, if you're the richest man in the world, right, and you hold the kind of power he does, with regard to, Tesla and SpaceX, irrespective of Starlink, okay, just those two elements and the interactions with different governments that he has and with the US government, this is a really important guy. And so, when you start introducing ideas of Starlink and how important that is, then hey, it gets even more important that he is he is discussed. So I can't shy away from it, even though I might bore people.
He's he's a very interesting figure, and I think you've got to go back to the time in South Africa to actually understand him. And he, of course, grew up in apartheid South Africa. So he's going to have a lot of his morals coming from that type of background. And although I remember my cousin saying something that just blew me away, because I was talking about oh dear, my uncle, and I was like, he's actually quite racist, and he's like, my cousin turned around to me and says, yeah, and we're only a little bit better, and my son's a bit better, and his son will be a bit better, and eventually we'll actually stop it. But at least we filter what we say, but we might still have incorrect thoughts or something, because that's the way you were brought up. And I thought, damn, you are so smart, you just get that slowly increasing.
We are products of our environment and our parenting. So
and so if you look at Elon, his dad was quite dodgy. They had an emerald mine across the border. They flew a plane across to illegally pick up emeralds and avoid tax. And at 15, Elon was carrying AK-47s across the border, which puts him in some pretty interesting legal framework. And that's where he started from. And I know people will hate me for saying that, but this is Elon who actually said that. It's not me. He said it in an interview, laughing about it. At 15, I was smuggling gems and guns across the border. And you think, okay, so
there you go.
Now that's the starting point. Where he is now is a vast improvement. So
very impressive. Thank you very much to Smith for your perseverance there. Bosh, bish, bash, bosh. Thanks, Smith. Really appreciate that. Good Aussie support there. Okay, we're going to move on to military aid now.
Does that mean the Aussies are winning in the donations again?
Always. Possibly. Not sure, actually. It's a bit of everyone. So thank you to everyone. So this is super important in my opinion. Bundestag members Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, not enough hyphens there, from the FDP, Anton Hofreiter from the Greens, and Andreas Schwarz from the SPD have called for further support for Ukraine in a letter to Chancellor Scholz and Defense Minister Pistorius. They urged to provide Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. So these are the equivalents, effectively, made by the same company as Storm Shadow and Scalp. The UK and French cruise missiles are being used. And indeed, Germany may decide to supply Ukraine with these missiles within 1 or 2 weeks. This was announced by German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, quoted by Tagesschau. This would be amazing. A couple of weeks away from having that would be absolutely phenomenal for the Ukrainians. So that's really good news. Moving on, Ukrainian pilots completed test flights on the Jazz-39 Gripen. I have reported this, but I just want to confirm that they're not just doing kind of orientation stuff and, you know, maybe looking at whiteboards. You know, they've got on these airframes and they've flown them around. Defense Minister has said the experiences from the training should be the basis for finding out if there are conditions to send Gripen planes to Ukraine. So they've actually, you know, flown these things, and they're obviously seeing if they can, you know, if they're suitable for their pilots, which I'm sure they are. There's no reason why they shouldn't be.
Wasn't there a tweet today that they've already started training pilots and ground crew?
Yeah, I think there are similar ones. Yeah, quite possibly. I would be amazed if they aren't. I mean, there's no point in starting all this. As I've said before, Saab are going to be and Sweden as well, because it's tax dollars for them. Like it looks like it's going to be a case of selling these to Ukraine. And so, you know, Saab are going to be making money. The Swedish government are going to be making money. Why wouldn't you want to stimulate your own economy to do this? So it's a win-win for Sweden, and
definitely.
I'm sure they'd be lubricating the cogs as much as possible in order to get the Ukrainians on those airframes. And Oryx here says of Belgium, the initial batch of 10 of 40 M113, so these are the old APCs back from, goodness me, pre-Vietnam, acquired in partnership with Luxembourg and the Netherlands, are currently en route to Ukraine. So 10 out of 40 of those. So that's good. They're still useful vehicles. They quite often get used for medevacs and whatnot. This is something I had shown you months and months ago, last year possibly even. So this is a video I showed you previously of a really big drone that can take 180 kilograms with a range of 70 kilometers. This is really sizable. It's a British drone. Great Britain has handed over a batch of the Malloy heavy drones to Ukraine. Carrying capacity, as I say, is 180 kilograms, which sound, which that was quite pleasant. That was a nice British sound intrusion there.
Better than death metal, right?
It's just slightly easier on the ears. Anyway, so you've got some interesting capability there, and how these might get used. It could be for doing things like medevacs or for carrying really big bombs. I don't know, but that's good stuff from the British there. And to carry on in the same vein, the British Army has unveiled the Hydra 400 drone. I'm just going to refresh this so you can get the image as well. So the British has unveiled the Hydra 400 drone, which can launch Brimstone missiles. This is really significant. So these are Brimstone missiles, to remind people, are air or ground launched fire and forget missiles that are pretty useful. They have been using them off the back originally of trucks, and I think they're using them. They're putting these on the back of Super Cats vehicles in Ukraine. They've been used variously. I've seen a couple of bits of footage of them being used from near the beginning of the war. I haven't seen too much recently, but useful missiles. Oh, I'm showing you something without allowing you to see it. That's a Brimstone. So that's what I was talking about.
I was very interested in that drone image then, because it looks like the missiles are actually dropping off the racking unit, doesn't it?
Yeah, rather than being fired. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry. Yep.
yeah, that's a really good point, actually. At the Defence Security and Equipment International Exhibition and Conference, representatives of the British Army said that the Hydra 400 will offer the capabilities of an Apache attack helicopter, but will fit in the trunk of a Land Rover. I mean, this is where war is going, right? Is the capabilities of these kind of machines to do the damage they can do, but not be the size of an Apache helicopter and not cost the amount of an Apache attack helicopter. I think it's really, really important. According to them, it takes only 6 minutes to prepare the unmanned aerial vehicle for launch. The Hydra 400 will be able to carry up to 3 Brimstone air-to-ground missiles and will be able to destroy enemy vehicles within a radius of more than 32 kilometers. This is massive, right? I think this is huge. So far, the Hydra 400 exists in the form of a prototype. By the end of the year, the British Army plans to test the unmanned aerial vehicle during the military exercises. However, according to the military, due to bureaucratic nuances, the drone is likely to enter service only in 5 years. Well, I reckon if they can throw that into the Ukrainian possession, that will get the best testing of a prototype you'll ask for. This is what the Germans have done at Rheinmetall with some of their kit, is given prototypes to Ukraine, the Skynex, I think they did that with, to see if it works. And then, what better place to test it out than a real battle, real warfare.
The Brimstones are only ground attack, aren't they?
Yes, as far as I know, they fired either from the air or from the ground to hit things on the ground.
Because the next step, obviously, if you've now got a drone platform that can fire the missiles, is getting your anti-air missiles firing off of
off drones.
Some type of drone. Like I've often sat here and wondered, like,
I was talking about that the other day.
Yeah, if you look, my brain's gone absolutely blank. I love this. I'm blaming it on the scotch. But if you're using an anti-tank missile or something like that, why aren't they sitting on drones already? And just having a camera pointing straight into the normal screen that they're looking through.
Yeah, I mean, if you can put a Brimstone on a drone, you can put a javelin. You can put a Stinger on a drone,
a javelin, right? Or something. Or a Stinger for your anti-air. And if you can get your Stinger on it, you can get it within 500 meters, 1 kilometer of the front line, which means suddenly, Russian helicopters and all that have a lot more of a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to Celestial Veggie. Very much appreciated. Another bloody Aussie. Awesome. Really appreciate that. The first, I don't mean bloody, I mean bloody in a nice way, in a kind of collegial way. The first confirmation of Jordan's transfer, you can't even see this, I must remember to do this. First confirmation of Jordan's transfer of ammunition for the Ukrainian Strela 10 air defense system. Jordan has a whole bunch of Challenger 1s, which I'd like them to be, to find their way to Ukraine. Now, we must be careful about celebrating different nations giving stuff. Like Jordan's transfer probably means, and I don't know this, probably means someone like the UK has paid for it. I know the UK just doesn't have a lot of stuff, so we end up flashing the cash more and going to other countries and say, can we buy this off you to give it to Ukraine? Because we ain't got jack in our lockers. But it's interesting to see where these things come from. First confirmation of Jordan's transfer of ammunition for the Strela 10. In the video, the Ukrainian Strela 10 air defense system equipped with a Jordanian missile shoots down a Russian air target. I'd like to remind you that early in the armed forces of the Ukraine, missiles for the OSA air defense system were transferred by Jordan, and they were also noticed. Who paid for them, I don't know, or whether it's Jordan themselves. It'd be great if it was Jordan, obviously. Brilliant stuff. Right. Move on to the next one. Destroying the Russian army using only 5% of the US defense budget is an extremely wise investment, says Senator Mitt Romney, quoted by the Telegraph. Mitt Romney is an interesting one. He's now just said that he's going to retire, which I think is a sad loss for the Senate, actually. So back when he was running for government, against the Democrats, running for president, I was, because I'm a liberal lefty, right? I was against Romney. But now in the days of fringe Marjorie Taylor Greene type Republicans, people like Mitt Romney just seem to be eminently sensible, and they say stuff that I'm like, I find myself agreeing with particularly when they're critiquing like the fringe politicians, and he's absolutely right here. Destroying the Russian army using only 5% of the US defense budget is an extremely wise investment. I mean, goodness me, US politicians and military minds back in the 80s would have bitten your arm off for this kind of return on investment. It's insanely good. Russia's been fundamentally degraded to the point that it won't be able to do anything for a generation meaningful, in my opinion. And that is down to the support the US and allies are giving to Ukraine. And Ukraine are doing all the hard work. So I just think that, yeah, absolutely right. And in fact,
it's it's always very interesting listening to the Russian take on this, where they keep trying to say to Ukraine, you know, the Americans are sending you to die on the front line. And what I always find really interesting is they always skip over the whole bit where they invaded Ukraine. It's always, you know, look, the Americans are sending you to die. We're fighting against you guys. Like, you know, it's this quite amazing mental gymnastics that the Russian media does to sit there and say and always point out the finger. And you see it on your threads all the time, you know, with bots or trolls or whatever, where they're just sitting there going, you know, they're sending the Ukrainians to die. Ukraine doesn't have a choice.
No one's sending, you know, no one in America's sending. Yeah, that really annoys me. Just staying on, by the way, Mitt Romney, I thought that, I know this is a bit of a sidebar and this would probably annoy a lot of people who are really pro-Trump, but I found this, he's got a book, because he's retiring, he's got a tell-all book coming out. It's really interesting reading about this. So Republican senators would clap Trump when he came in to make a speech at a luncheon. With this particular luncheon, they standing ovation when Trump walked in. Trump made a kind of bumbling, typical Trumpian speech, and then when he left, apparently all the senators laughed at Trump. And there's this facade that has gone on in the Republican Party for the last sort of 5 years, 7 years, I'd say, where they support due to kind of realpolitik reasons. They give vehement support, partly because they're afraid of their own base kind of striking back at them. But they've supported Trump really strongly. But actually, behind the scenes, they don't respect him at all. And this is kind of what apparently Romney's book taps into here. But I just thought that was interesting. I just like that bit of news came out at the same time I was reading this from Mitt Romney, so I thought I'd better read it. Anyway, I don't want to get down a whole Trump rabbit hole because I'll get in trouble. Right. Sorry, I don't know if you wanted to say anything at all.
Oh no, don't get me started on Trump. Okay. Yeah, I'm worse than you. Sorry if that offends anyone, but you know, I just look at a man who's built casinos, declared bankruptcy, didn't pay lots of people, and then said, "Look, I'm a good businessman."
Yeah, 4 of his entities have gone bankrupt, haven't they? And he received $120 million off his dad. And apparently, if he had invested that in banking, he would have made more money than he did. Yeah. But anyway,
yeah. Look, that's a long topic for a different day. Where people,
definitely
down the pub maybe one day, JP. I just want to throw in there, Lost in France. I'm going to call him out here. He waited until I had a mouthful of scotch and actually posted a comment where it says, "I never thought I would see the day when we are seeing the Bush gang as the sensible ones."
That's kind of what I was saying. That was kind of what I was saying. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've seen lots of Republicans just who weren't particularly massive fans of Bush say, "I wish we had Bush back," and things. So anyway, rounds on me. Thank you, Robert Pitt, Jonathan, and Matt. Thanks for your efforts in covering the war for us. I really appreciate that. And yeah, thanks for Matt for popping in as well. Of course. Thanks. Of course. So here we have Russian authorities. So this is now moving on to how the Russians are supporting their own war efforts in terms of military aid or policy or whatever. Russian authorities will now be able to send deaf oligophrenic, I don't know what that means actually. I suppose if it's like an oligopoly, maybe it's having multiple personality disorder, and schizophrenic people to the front line. Yesterday, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu approved a list of diseases with which citizens will not be able to serve under contract during mobilization, martial law, and wartime. That consists of 26 points, including HIV, hepatitis B and C, diabetes, mellitus, all forms of active tuberculosis, drug addiction, lack of limbs or a kidney. However, many serious diseases were not on the list. Now people with heart defects, hearing loss, schizophrenia and oligophrenia will be sent to the front to die for the Tsar. As Russian opposition
early age dementia, JP.
Thank you. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's not a good thing to have on the front line.
Nope. Or
I'm
schizophrenic. Let's be honest.
well.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this order was created so that more volunteers could be recruited from prisons. That is now not just Russian prisoners, but seriously ill Russian prisoners will fight in Ukraine. From the point of view of ordinary person, this is incredible cynicism. But the Russian command does not care who they will send to war. What this says is that they need boots on the ground. They desperately need it. But there you go. So we're going to move on to geopolitical stuff now. So Russia raises the interest rate from 12% to 13%. All measures to avoid an economic meltdown are temporary fixes, says Tim White. Printing money causes inflation. Raising interest rates props up the table, but lack of exports weakens the currency. Rising oil prices are saving Russia right now. There's a really good video from Joe Blogs that came out yesterday talking about the Russian economy vis-a-vis hydrocarbons. Well worth going to look at Joe Blogs' one on that. And what has happened is they're getting increased revenue from oil that they were, which you might think is, oh, that's really bad, but actually they're selling less of it, and they're selling fewer barrels of it because they are going along with OPEC with restricting supply to try and screw over kind of the West or control prices, but actually it's not working in their best interest to do so. They're kind of towing the OPEC party line, but that's not good. They actually want to sell more barrels because they need that money big time. But that pushes the price up. So they're getting more per barrel, but they're not selling as much. So in real terms, they're taking a big cut in oil revenue, but they're also taking a massive cut in gas revenue. And that is really significant because you can't just suddenly supply gas to another country, because you have to have pipelines in order to supply gas to countries, or you turn it into liquefied natural gas to move it by ship, for example. But actually, they don't have the capacity to do that particularly. And you have to put the infrastructure in place to achieve that. So Russia are in an economically a very difficult position at the moment, and their interest rates are rising and things are not looking good. So there you go. Right, moving on. And here we have Italian Defense Minister Guido Crosetto said that he hopes the war can end within 7 to 8 months. Quote, "I hope that within the next 7 or 8 months, an attempt will be made to resolve the war in Ukraine," he said during a trilateral meeting in London. Now, someone said to me yesterday, because I said the other day how Italy, no, I didn't. I said how far right movements are growing in Europe. So there's a resurgence in the far right in Europe, and it's quite often the far right who are very have great sympathies with Russia, probably due to totalitarian kind of ideals, but a lot to do with Russian influence coming the other way and actually funding these groups quite often to add to sow discord in Europe. And someone rightfully pointed out, yeah, but so there's a couple of anomalies here where you have right-wing governments who are against Russia. One of them is Poland, because of the history of the people in charge of the Polish right-wing government, and that is because a plane went down. So one of the twins, I forget their surnames, but one of the back a good decade or so ago, a plane went down, and it was thought that the Russians did it, and it had something like 53 Polish politicians, or I'm probably butchering the stats here, but one of them was a twin whose twin brother is now still really prominent in Polish politics, and so he blames the Russians for that death. And so there's this feeling, and the Polish generally blame the Russians, I think, for that plane coming down. So there's this general feeling in Poland, as well as being very close and having a history with the USSR. Anyway, there's a is that who it was? Right.
That's what Frederick said.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And so I think Poland's maybe a different case, whereas Hungary and Slovakia maybe to a degree, and Croatia and Serbia have very different histories and contexts. But there is an interesting case of Italy that has this right-wing coalition of three fairly far-right parties that have gone into coalition, and they really support Ukraine. Well, actually, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So Meloni, who is the prime minister, really supports Ukraine, and therefore her party along with that. But actually, the coalition that she's in with, the coalition parties don't particularly support Ukraine. So there's just a bit of an interview here. I had a bit. It was so you can come in on my behalf here while I look for something. It was highlighted, but I've moved it over to a different browser.
I actually had a question that I just asked the person how to pronounce their name, and they said I've got to learn whichever language it is. And I'm sorry, I speak 3 languages. That's enough for me. But they had a question earlier, which I thought was really actually good. And it actually said, when Ukrainians win the war, will they be like Russia, with stuff like arresting gays? And I don't know if that was meant to be gays or guys who haven't committed any crime, or will they be more like Western countries? And I thought that was a really interesting one, because Ukraine is being currently very, very careful about who they're arresting, making sure there's a lot of evidence. But the interesting bit for me was, or will they be more like Western countries? And my mind goes straight back to at the end of World War II, where Nazi collaborators, suspected Nazi collaborators, were beaten, killed, head shaved, all these types of things. And that was done by the Western countries. I think.
Yeah, so France had a very interesting relationship with kind of Vichy France and whatnot. I think that is. I've asked previously. It's going to. I've stated that I think it's going to be very difficult coming to terms or managing Donbass particularly. I think Crimea would be actually somewhat easier. I think a lot of Russians will leave Crimea, and you'll get a lot of Ukrainians going back to Crimea who have left, and you'll get that with the Donbass. But I get the sense that Donbass has this possibly a stronger cultural, historical connection to Russia, or at least sympathies with Russia. So
look, so did Kharkiv. Kharkiv had a very long and strong Russian history, and yet no one was interested in being any part of Russia. When I was in Donetsk before Maidan, I'm going to go out on a limb and say no one there was interested in being part of Russia. No one that I ever met told me that Russia was wonderful. So I think, that, of course, when a man is running around with a gun and you don't have a gun telling you to love country X, well, you're going to love country X, aren't you? Especially if he's pointing the gun at your family or your children. So I think there's a bit of that there. There's also a lot that Russia spent a lot of money in the east of Ukraine. There was a lot of money pouring in, a lot of, when you say corruption in Ukraine, and I can only ever say, like, my personal opinion on this one was, the further east you got, the more corrupt it was. There was, you could see it. So the more towards Russia you got, the more corrupt it was. So of course, if you're getting lots of money from Russia, you're going to support Russia. We see that in all our businesses, in all our Western countries and things like that. So why would Ukraine be any different?
Yeah. The quote I was looking for was this, but she couldn't. So talking about Maloney, but she could not deliver anything because she's leading a coalition which is in the form of 3 main parties. 2 of them are pro-Russian. So the other 2 parties that she's is it Brothers of Italy? Are in league with. So Berlusconi's party, although he's passed away now, and Salvini's party are both really quite pro-Russian. So this is why when they came to power, people were worrying that Italy would actually go much more in terms of sympathies for Russia, but they haven't. She's been really staunch in being pro-Ukrainian, but that's probably her and her party. Anyway, but the third one, which is her party, it used to be anti-European, anti-US, anti-France, and anti-Germany, and that's so it's a really interesting mix of different positions going on in Italy. But I suppose for the point of this video, they are strongly in favor of Ukraine. At least she is. She's made some absolutely phenomenal speeches in the Italian parliament in support of Ukraine and quashing kind of pro-Russian sentiments in the parliament that I've shared with you. So good stuff there. Right, moving on, Slovakia, and I still want to share with you the great BBC Sounds, great Radio 4, I think, piece that's on BBC Sounds that talks to what's going on in Slovakia with again the rise of the far right, and they are talking very much in terms of being pro-Russian. And I played you a clip of the sort of Russian embassy where there's apparently a lot of disinformation coming out, a lot of internet disinformation. So Slovakia is a bit of a worry going forward in terms of the looming elections, whether they are going to elect a government that is pro-Russian. But right now they've made some good decisions, which is expelling another Russian diplomat from Bratislava. Quote, "The reason is that the activities of an employee of the Russian embassy grossly violated the Geneva Convention on Diplomatic Relations." I'd like to know what happened, which was carefully documented by the competent authorities of the Slovak Republic, explained the Slovak Foreign Ministry. Moscow said it would respond to the expulsion of the diplomat. So good news, and actually we're going to come to that in terms of the US as well. So Romania will try to double the export of Ukrainian grain through their ports. That's really good news. Ukrainian grain is an issue in Europe because of the glut forcing down the prices, and European farmers not being a big fan. But Romania are going to try and, through the Danube, one presumes, get that grain exported and onto the global markets. Then we're going to go to Armenia. So Prime Minister of Armenia, Pashinyan, our place is with the Western world. We must quickly move away from Russia. This is so geopolitically important. I've talked about this the last couple of days. However, the Armenian president has also just said, and this has come out today, Nikol Pashinyan instructed members of his political team to notify international partners about the coup d'etat in Armenia being prepared by the Russian authorities, Zokorov reported, citing its sources. According to the newspaper, ministers and deputies from the ruling party are writing and calling their Western colleagues with a request to prevent a possible coup in Armenia, since if Pashinyan leaves, pro-Russian forces will come to power. So as the premier in Armenia is siding, the president is siding with the West more and more, then Russia. How does Russia react? Well, coup d'etat, I can see as being a pretty plausible move by the Russians. The only thing for the Russians is that they're so distracted with what's going on in Ukraine, with what's going on in the rest of the Eurasian states and in Africa and BRICS that they have a lot to consider. But Armenia, what is going on in Armenia, I think is fascinating at the moment, and shows that Russia are politically losing influence in places where they really traditionally had an awful lot. Just moving on quickly, ICC opens offices. Did you want to say anything at all, Matt?
I just wanted to pop back. I was just talking to Ataku. I'm sorry, my Japanese, I learned it 30 years ago and I failed. So, and also Gen Consensus there was asking about it, and yeah, it was actually gays and not guys in his question. So I just wanted to touch very quickly, I know it's out of sync here, but Ukraine's been working very hard to accept the LGBTQ community. I'm trying to get all the letters in there. I'm not quite sure if there's more anymore.
More.
But I will say this, you are talking the first generation of acceptance, which puts them about where we were in the 1980s, 1990s. We have pride parades in Ukraine. Generally, there's little abuse or problems or anything like that. And if people don't necessarily agree, they keep their mouth shut. So
so
gays are welcome in Ukraine.
yeah, it's an interesting one, this, because you have situations in Europe where you've got kind of democratic backsliding that's been evident in both Hungary and Poland, where you have to jump through hoops to join the EU, but there's no mechanism in the EU in place that if you then regress from those high standards, I'm talking about like democratic institutions, transparency, and all these kind of things, then there's nothing the EU can really do apart from kind of bribe you effectively to try and keep your standards up. So Hungary and Poland, if it wasn't for the Ukrainian war, Poland would be in quite a similar position to Hungary, because actually there's a staunchly anti-EU government in place that has been rolling back rules on, say, abortion, on judiciaries, on, you can go across like democratic institutions and mechanisms, but also into the cultural landscape. And the same with Hungary. And yet, you've got Ukraine wanting to join the EU, so they're going to have to jump through hoops, and some of those jumping through hoops might be over and above where other EU nations presently are. So you've got this interesting situation where Ukraine could be even more welcoming, or more egalitarian in terms of sexual orientation or whatever you want to talk about in the cultural landscape, or the social landscape, but it could be that Hungary and actually Poland, for example, and I'm not necessarily saying this, but they might be actually slightly regressed from where Ukraine are. So there's definitely an interesting dynamic going there. But I think Ukraine know it's in their best interests to be a more welcoming place anyway. They know they're on the world stage now, the global stage, and everyone's looking at them through magnifying glass. So not only might they want to be morally more egalitarian or whatever, and do all these other things to do with corruption and transparency and democracy and whatever, do all of these things. Not only might they want to do that, but they also realize they have to do it too, because if they don't, then their chances of accession to the EU and the chances of getting things like funding from the IMF and World Bank and all this kind of stuff are damaged. And so there's a practicality involved as well. I don't know if that helps. So I was just going to go on to say the ICC here, International Criminal Court, opens an office in Kyiv to investigate Russian war crimes. The office has been set up to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of responding to the crimes that Russia continues to commit against Ukraine and Ukrainians every day, says the Prosecutor General Kostin. That's a really, really big step, I think, as is said here, really big step. And I think Russia's going to be in trouble going forward. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt they've committed a whole suite of absolutely terrible war crimes. It is just a matter of time. The evidence is there. It's a matter of meticulous gathering the evidence, analysis, synthesis, and then you're charging the right people with those crimes. Yeah, President Zelensky will meet with US President Joe Biden. He's had a bit of a bad week, Joe Biden. We won't go into that. Zelensky will likely attend the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The exact location of the meeting between both leaders is unclear. The White House has declined to comment. So that'll be good. Good to get those two meeting. And staying on the US has imposed sanctions against 150 plus companies and individuals involved in the supply of US and other Western technologies and goods to Russia, in particular by circumventing sanctions. This is exactly what needs to happen. Thanks to our partners for this decisive step, says Andrew Yermak, who is the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. So that is really good news. We talked a lot recently about sanctions evasion and loopholes. So US tightening that will be super, super important. Staying on the US still, the US has imposed a new package. Oh yeah, this is just gives you a bit more detail. So the individuals are from Russia, Belgium, UAE, Slovenia, Turkey, and Central African Republic. Now, UAE, I think is important. We saw how the UAE are apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, exporting a whole load of electronic comms equipment to Russia, where they previously in one area they literally, so it went from one area is $1 million of exports last year to $149 million this year, which is an increase of 149 times, right? And then the other area was like $0 to $60 million, which is an infinite increase, right? So the UAE, something needs to be done if that is indeed true. Well, I don't think it's any coincidence that we see UAE on that list. And I think that's really, really good news. I'm going to stay on the US again. Joe Biden will appoint the former Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, as the special representative for the recovery of economy of Ukraine. I think this is really important because it shows how important to the US Ukraine's recovery is. Pritzker will encourage investment strategies in Ukraine, as well as attract public and private investments from other countries. I hope that Ukraine doesn't become a commercial football that is a pawn amongst other nations and entities like the IMF and the World Bank. But you almost have no option here. Like either you let a country get invaded and it's on its knees. If Ukraine wants these kind of loans and things that come with strings attached, then they're going to go and get them. And even though there might be strings attached, and it means that other countries will have a vested interest in the recovery of Ukraine and have their corporations working in Ukraine, then that's a price you kind of got to pay, because the only other option is being completely invaded by Russia and not having a free market at all, and having essentially a dictatorship. But there you go. And still on America, US vows a response, and this is what I said earlier, referenced earlier. The US vows a response after Russia expels diplomats. The US, quote, will respond appropriately to Moscow's decision to expel 2 US diplomats from Russia on September the 14th, State Department spokesperson Matt Miller said in a press briefing. So what's gone on here? Well, what has happened is the US has, we'll read this from the Kyiv Independent. The US will respond appropriately to Moscow's decision to expel US diplomats, 2 of them, from Russia, State Department spokesperson Matt Miller has said. The unprovoked expulsion of our diplomatic personnel is wholly without merits. On September 14th, the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry told US Ambassador Lynn Tracy that 2 American diplomats, Jeffrey Silin and David Bernstein, had been declared persona non grata, and would have to leave the Russian Federation within 7 days. The Russian government accused the diplomats of conducting illegal activities and collaborating with Robert Shonov, a Russian citizen who was arrested on espionage charges in May this year. Yet again, Russia has chosen confrontation and escalation over constructive diplomatic engagement, Miller said. It continues to harass employees of our embassy just as it continues to intimidate its own citizens. Miller said the US diplomats were just doing their jobs and that neither was guilty of wrongdoing or criminal activity. He said that Shonov, a former US consulate employee, had acted in compliance with Russian law. Miller declined to give details about the US's government's next steps, but said they would respond appropriately and expeditiously to the expulsion. He said that Silin and Bernstein had not yet left Russia. So there's a lot of American news pieces there, but I think this is important. We've got an escalation here, perhaps, of a diplomatic kind of warfare going on between the 2 nations, and I think that is worthy of note and worrying if there's a deterioration there. But I think Russia are just becoming more and more this kind of pariah, isolationist pariah state that is struggling to do any kind of effective diplomacy with anyone at the moment, apart from Kim Jong-un and North Korea. Have you got anything to say, Matt?
Chat's going off. Sorry, JP. I've been focusing
cool. Mate, that's what you're here for, dude. Thanks, man.
No, we actually had a follow-up question asking, what Ukraine will be like after the war with the LGBT community.
I don't know. So, I mean, who knows? But I think you've got to move towards Western ideals and Western integration. And I assume that is interestingly, Russia is moving in the other direction. So what Russia has done, and I've written articles on this, and I in fact did a whole video on this, is that Russia, since 2017, and actually before, since like 2012 onwards, Putin, I mean, it's interesting that the Soviet Union used to be an atheistic state, right? Like doctrinally, if you like, or policy-wise. But since 1991, it has got into bed, and actually since in the last 15 years, it is almost formally in unison with the Russian Orthodox Church. And Putin is using the church really effectively to drive a nationalistic, very hardline conservative agenda. Like, I mean, really ultra conservative. So getting the church to make these proclamations, shutting down, free speech, but also, freedom of sexuality, if you like, and all these kind of cultural things that Russia was, starting to get used to having. Well, actually, this is why the band like Pussy Riot very famously went and did their thing in a church, because the church is really in bed with the Kremlin and forming this kind of very austere kind of ultra nationalist, quasi-religious kind of state, and I suppose you've got Ukraine. It can either look towards that idea of how to arrange a state and a culture and a society, or can look to the West and opt for something different. So I'd imagine they're going to go. They will move away from whatever Russia has. Is my guess. I hope that made some sense. I'm going to go on to this Cuban. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Matt?
No, I'm just reading lots of it, but someone's mentioned Scotland in here, and I thought I really have to, kind of plug in the Macallan. I'm trying to remember who it was. It might have been Bob who was drinking Glenfiddich or something like that. And I have to point out that we've got the real Scotch here, not the cheap nasty Scotch, because someone's actually making references in the chat. So
he's gone high. He's gone highbrow whiskey. Yeah, Scotch Wars. So Cuba, I talked about how the Russians were trying to gather effectively mercenaries, or at least recruit soldiers from Cuba. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez has said that Cuba rejects the participation of its citizens as mercenaries in the war. But this contradicts the statement of the Cuban ambassador in Moscow that Cuba does not oppose participation of its citizens. So there is this kind of internal thing going on with Cuba. There have been at least 200 people fighting for Russia from Cuba, at least according to the email account of that have been hacked of some Russian commander. Now, just to throw this in there as well. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Oh no, have I not got it? Oh yeah, here it is. So although we can argue about like the showing of POWs, and I do get that. Although there's an interesting argument to be had around that, which someone sent me on a private message, which I said we'll have an extra on, the ethics of showing POWs. But the Bolivar battalion, made up of South American volunteers fighting on the Ukraine side of Ukraine, said it had captured a Cuban fighter who was fighting on the side of Russia. So this is where you kind of have like, people from the same, it's like Russians in the Russian volunteer corps fighting against, Russians. It's about ideology as much as nationhood, isn't it? There. Anyway, so that's Cuban situation there. Mark Bizq, thank you so much, Mark. Really, really appreciate this. We appreciate the Brits. He says, we appreciate the Aussies and all that you do. Also, topping up the wine fund. Thank you amazingly, Mark Bizq from Canada, from the United States of Canada. No, only joking, of course, from the wonderful Maple Country. Thank you so much. Anyway, as I was just coming on to really the last bit to say, Matt, which is another blow. This is from Tim White. Another blow for Russia and Belarus and their athletes hoping to make the Paris 2024 Olympics. Individual athletes are allowed to compete in some disciplines, but they still have to qualify. It's now confirmed no athletes from the terrorist nations will be in next week's delayed Asian Games. So one would presume that the Asian Games act as a qualifier for the Olympics, which means if the Russians and Belarusians can't participate in the Asian Games, then they're going to find it even more difficult to qualify for the Olympics. So that's how I read that. These kind of cultural things that are not just about like sanctioning or military assistance, but like the more kind of social, cultural aspects of the war and what people can do to show disdain for the Russia's actions, I think are still really, really important. And that's good. I think good news there. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, look, I think it's wonderful. I don't think the Russian athletes should be able to compete whatsoever. It's sports washing in the most egregious way. It sickens me, especially, when you think back to the Ukrainian fencer who suddenly got banned because they didn't shake the hands of the Russian who they defeated. And you think, yeah. I can't say it on YouTube. Your video will get me demonetized, but you just think, come on, guys, be reasonable, be humans, yeah, and Russia and going back to the USR, put a huge store in athletics, and there's huge funding for athletics. It's like, when you look at the US always getting a hell of a lot of medals. Well, then you look at sports funding in the US, and you go, now we know why they get it.
Correlation between
China's
funding
doing it as
and
well.
gold medals
Yeah,
is massive, and I think it's
yeah,
a real issue actually in terms of sport, because all you're doing is you're celebrating who's got the most money. Yeah, I think there's
exactly.
a really interesting debate to be had there.
Mm.
Thank you, but again to Mark, really, really generous. So Frederick earlier on said, how significant or potent is Ukraine's home production of various weapons? This is something, as a really interesting question. They are doing an absolute bucket load. So the guy that used to be in charge of the rail network has been put in charge of basically this kind of stuff, the production of Ukrainian weapons, and the increase in production capacity and the increase in the range of what they produce has gone through the roof. Now, it's still going to be something like a drop in the ocean compared to what they need, but they are producing mortar rounds, they are producing ammunition rounds, they are producing things like tanks, even their own version of that, I think the T-72. They are producing things like the Bogdana self-propelled gun, and a whole host of drones and Neptune missiles, all this stuff that is really, really important. They need as much production, indigenous production, as possible to make sure that their efforts are sustainable going forward, that they aren't just relying on Western aid or allied aid coming through. So I think I can't talk to the exact numbers. I did give you some numbers some weeks back in the increase in production of some of this stuff. They are making some of it abroad, so they're working with I think mainly probably Polish and Bulgarian and Czech maybe entities to get some of this stuff made. But it is significant. It's not where they need it to be, of course, but it is moving in the right direction and at quite a decent pace. So I hope that goes some way to answering that. And then he asks, what is the extent of partisan activity? Is there any really? Yes, there's been a lot of I've done some segments on this previously. There was even before the Kherson. If you go and look at my playlist tab, there is on my playlist a bunch of recommended videos, and in there are 2 videos on partisan activity that was taking place, in particularly in Kherson before the end of the Kherson counteroffensive. There's been activity in Melitopol, Mariupol are both places where there's been a lot of partisan activity, and in Crimea as well. And this goes from things like the yellow ribbons, sort of people putting up posters and plastering yellow ribbons, so that kind of like psychological effect across to, as I talked about in yesterday's extra, assassination, where they've been doing all car bombs. So there is partisan activity. Is there any really? Yes, there is. You don't always hear about it. Sometimes you see smoke going off, and someone reports there's smoke in Mariupol, and there will be times when that smoke is coming from some kind of partisan activity, but you might not know about it, and a lot of smaller things. And this is very dangerous activities. These people are putting their lives on the line. But yeah, there are lots of really good articles. I read out most of an Economist article on partisan activity to you when I was dealing with this previously. Is there anything you want to add to that, mate?
Yeah, sorry, my attention was completely torn in the middle of all that.
That's cool.
Look, I'm going to say most of the partisan activity is just supplying intel.
Yes.
99% of what they do
point.
is intel.
Yeah, such a good point.
Actually getting involved in combat, no, they have absolutely no need to most of the time. You're only getting involved in combat when it's something's out of range of other potential military weapons. But most of it is just intelligence, whether it's counting trucks going down a road so they know how much supplies are there, how many troops are going in a direction. All these things, they matter.
Geolocating stuff and sending it. So I showed you part of a BBC video documentary on one of these command centers that is working out where to strike things. And one of the women there, she used to be a teacher, and now her job is like taking texts and phone calls from basically partisans or I don't know what, you call them partisans, working behind these lines who are consistently giving them intel on where things are so that they can hit them. And you're right, that's almost more important than blowing up a car of a mayor or something. This is like allowing the Ukrainians to take out with some kind of intel certainty, take out really high value targets, as well as doing these other things. But yeah, really good point. Thanks, Matt. The third question from Frederick was, how big are both armies currently deployed within the borders of 2014 Ukraine? General consensus hopefully has answered for us here. Ukraine has an estimated 700,000 men at arms and has formed special assault brigades to help the offensive. That's probably 50,000 men in addition to 100,000 armored and mechanized infantry units. I mean, it's very difficult to know exactly how many people they've got. And also, when you're talking about the armed forces, you've got people working in personnel, you've got people working in logistics, you've got people working, people are pushing pens as well as, pushing landmines. So there are, what do you mean by how big are the armies? Like we heard before about how the Russians had 100,000 people in Luhansk. Well, it turns out that a whole bunch of those are training, a whole bunch of those are just working in logistics and command and control centers. And actually something like, I don't know, I'm making this up, I can't remember what the figures were, but something like 10,000 of those are frontline troops. So when you say you got 100,000 troops, actually, who are the people that have got guns that are attacking, that are able to attack a position? Well, there's 10,000 out of 100,000. So size of the armies can tell you so much, but it doesn't tell you necessarily everything. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Matt.
Nope, I was looking for other questions while you very expertly answered.
Yep. So Frederick, another one says, why do Ukrainians throw just a handful of drones, maximally 20 to 30 every third or fourth day, rather than amassing them for a major attack that might actually blind air defenses? I've actually wondered this question myself. Now, we know they've got 10,000 trained drone operators through the United 24 Army of Drones provision. They've got an absolute ton of drones, and they're building a load of drones, and they're getting given a load of drones, fundraising from national agencies, so on and so forth. I wonder why sometimes we don't see more. So the Russians have claimed that skies are black with drones. There are a lot of drones. I've seen footage that's relatively new. I've seen that I haven't seen this type of footage before. I was looking at footage that showed drones being used in a combined arms capacity. In other words, they were using drones with IEDs on them to drop munitions on positions that the infantry were attacking as well. So it's not, so quite often we've seen drones drop munitions, right? That's nothing unusual. But we've seen, what we haven't seen is drones maybe working with infantry in a combined arms maneuver, and that is something that I think is relatively new, and we're starting to see that. So I think we are seeing an absolute bucket load of drones, but we haven't seen maybe the mass type of drone usage you're hinting at there. Matt, anything to say to that at all?
Yeah, this is a lot closer to my field of engineering. Very simply, bandwidth.
I was going to say, is there frequency issues, bandwidth?
Yes, there certainly will be. And remember, bandwidth is also about the speed of the signal getting back and forth. So there's only certain frequencies that you want to be operating drones on. So you've got a limited scope. You're gonna generally have a point. Oh God, I'm going back 20 years to uni days where you're going to have a 0.1 to 0.2 degree each time you're transmitting, where you're going to get interference. So, if someone's transmitting at 5 gigahertz, for argument's sake, then you've got, 5.04, for argument's sake, is the next frequency that you can actually use. Going up now, when you layer in encryption, you can layer across digital signals, but you're still going to get interference, and so it's going to be a lot more difficult. So when you're talking in a war situation where you have jamming going and things like that, and especially if you're talking about an FPV drone, then you don't want yourself suddenly losing signal because your mate's jumped on his FPV drone 50 meters away, so his signal's now cancelling yours. So mass drone attack is going to be a problem until we get to the point where we have mothership drones, which are then controlling 10 drones.
Right. Which we know
science
the Chinese.
fiction.
Well, it's not science fiction. We know the Chinese have kind of got some of that
Yeah.
capability, and that is coming online. All I can say is jamming. I hope you like jamming too. To quote Bob Marley, just randomly. Anyway, that was very poor. I'll shut up now.
You should have been singing it.
Yeah. Yes. True. Are there any other questions that you think are worthy of discussing?
I actually had another question here, and I don't know how to post it on the screen for you.
Yep.
So other people can see it. But it was from Adrian Wall-Hayes, if I pronounce that right. JP and Matt, am I right being concerned about how much of the post-war Ukraine economy will be skewed towards defense, war, weapons industries?
I don't know if it's worth being worried about. I think you're right. I think it will happen. Why is that a worry? I mean, as what you want going forward after the war is, one, Ukraine to be secure from further threats, whether that's Russia again or other people being opportunistic. So you want them to be secure, which means they're going to have some kind of indigenous, I think, weapons manufacturing industrial capacity going on. So there is that. But you also want them to have jobs and a quality of life and a standard of living, so on and so forth. And if those jobs are initially going to be skewed towards the military industrial complex, then I guess that's one of your options. I mean, is it that bad of an issue? I don't know. It is not ideal. You'd like to have a really broad repertoire of corporations or sectors, but I think it will be skewed towards defense initially. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's going to be very much skewed. There's going to be a lot of money going into defense for Ukraine over the next 20 years, which is sad because, obviously you want the money to go into education. And
mate, I'm going to have to lead you to it. Give me 1 minute. Can you carry this for a minute?
Oh, certainly. Oh, everyone wants to talk to me, don't they? Someone better ask me a question. No, I was going to say, Ukraine is going to have a lot of problems because the country is old, tired, a lot of USSR infrastructure, and then a lot of money now is going to be spent on military, which means standard of living is going to drop. Personally, I think that's really quite sad because as someone who watched Ukraine rise from USSR control to being an independent country to fighting for its independence, I think it's going to be really sad because the Ukrainian people deserve a chance. And I think maybe we shouldn't be like it was in, if you remember the movie Charlie Wilson's War, where money stopped the moment the war ended. I think it'll be a lot better for Ukraine if that funding keeps coming and it's allowed to keep going. Right, let's see if there's any questions here. You'll have to put up with me. Foreign investment from Luke. There's a lot of foreign investment that has strings attached, Luke. So it's a bit interesting when you see a lot of the companies when they're saying, look, or countries will say, we'll give you money, but it's like, well, you give us access to this natural resource or that natural resource. So it's going to be a long-term commitment and a long-term drain on Ukraine. Glad to see you back, JP. This is horrible.
So this is the joy of having primary progressive multiple sclerosis, is that when you drink a big cup of tea from my nicely merchandise, this is old and battered now, Tippling Philosopher thermal mug, a whole big cup of tea, then I'm afraid my MS is going to say, yeah, at some point, mate, you're going to have to go. So I had to go. So thanks for carrying that. It's first ever live stream I did on my Tippling Philosopher live channel. Sorry, I got someone in to interview. Right, I went live and he didn't turn up, and I was stuck there. And as I was just me on the screen talking to the audience, I texting someone else saying, "Please come on live with me now. My interviewee's not turned up," and someone random, so someone that I knew that was good to be interviewed, came on, and like within 5 minutes it was sorted out. It's like, oh no! So I know what it feels like to kind of carry it like that, Matt. So sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
No, cheers, mate. So any other questions that are worthy of a little delving into?
There was a question then about the accounting system in Ukraine, which was actually really interesting because it is actually really quite important. Kathy actually says, does Ukraine practice GAP, generally accepted accounting principles? And all I can really say on that one is my accountant never stole from me in Ukraine, so that's always a bonus. And you had companies like Ernest and Young and that KP, whatever it is, what's the big accounting companies?
KPMG.
KPMG. Thank you very much. Yeah, they're all there, and so yeah, Ukraine is. I think I once said it in my last one where I said Ukraine reminded me of Australia in the 1980s, in the fact that it has a lot of potential and it's learning to grow, and it gets the advantage of other countries have done it before, and so it gets to copy easy models. And so I think I was very excited to live in Ukraine. There was an energy compared to when you drive around Australia and everyone's got a big house and everyone's got money for food. And I'm saying this, very throwaway when I say everyone. But you got big houses, 2 cars in the garage, food on the table. Yeah, doesn't mean everyone's rich or something, but the standard of living is massively high. And then you go to a country like Ukraine and you see the people there looking at the other countries around the world with hunger. And they're like, that's what we want. We want to be like that. We want, the nice homes, the higher standard of living. So yeah, I think Ukraine is, and I think my personal belief is Russia started the invasion when it did is 2022. The figures came out for 2021 that Ukraine had just overtaken Russia for the average weekly income or monthly income or whatever you want to say it is, and the standard of living was better in Ukraine than Russia. And if Ukraine could do that on the Russian border, then people in Russia would start asking questions. And that's my personal belief and actually why the war started. It was just very simply, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a really important point. I think there was a lot of talk about how Ukraine was this greener grass on the other side of the fence, and that's why Putin didn't like that, because as soon as your population start looking over there and saying, well, hang on, they used to be part of us, they're not part of us now, and they're doing better than us, then that's a real issue, because it means that they fully understand their own lot in Russia. I mean, Russia has got a huge amount of money that has been channeled towards very few people. So you've got an oligopoly there, oligarchy, you've got a kleptocracy, so there's corruption, there's channeling all that money to very few people. And what you have is a lot of money in Russia, but not a lot of redistribution of that income, or adequate distribution of that income. So you get a whole swathes of the country are just not seeing that money. And then when they're seeing former Soviet republics like doing all right, thank you very much, and then saying, and we're going to integrate into Europe, and look, and this is kind of European ideals, and you're seeing that over the fence, then he goes, right, we've got to put an end to this. We need them back with us, because otherwise we're going to have some popular discontent. So yeah. That's my tuppence. By the way, someone mentioned I'm doing a live stream on Sunday with Rick the Ukrainian. You might know him from his own live streams, fundraising, but also from translating videos of POWs being interviewed and things like that. So I'm dropping in onto his live stream. We're going to co-live stream. So he will have started his own for about an hour, and then I'll drop into it and show mine live, and we'll have two kind of live streams going at the same time. So anyway, to let you know that that's happening on Sunday, go and check out the live tab. Thanks someone for reminding me about that. Is there anything you wanted to add or any other questions, Matt?
No, I'd just like to thank the awesome community. The fact that we all support each other. We all, there's a lot of people in here with interesting life stories, and it's really, really wonderful that everyone actually seems to support each other, and you see all the different, and I'm sure you do because you get to see everyone's comments at the end of the day, and you see all the people that are always talking to each other.
You probably could imagine it, but the amount of YouTube comments I read a day is actually not healthy. It's not healthy. I have a life, but apparently I don't have a life.
Every day, so many people say good morning to other people, ask about their day, respond back with kind words to each other. So you've got this one layer of a community which is starting and focused on you, but you've got these sub levels of community. It's this really amazing. If I was a smart person, I could probably give you some nice words to describe it, but it's just lovely to see.
I totally agree.
So much support.
I'm totally honored by the amazing people and the expertise that you guys that you guys swap as well, and I learned so much from the threads. It's incredible. As I say, I spend way too long. I don't know if there is any other YouTuber that spends this amount of time reading the threads of their commenters, but I do. I feel I owe it to you guys for being such an amazing community to interact with you. Julian Roster here. Thank you very much, by the way, Julian. Says, what tea do you drink, JP? I'm taking a punt on Yorkshire tea. Do you know what? Here's a guy that knows his tea. Yes, it is Yorkshire tea. It's only Yorkshire tea. There is no other tea.
I'm going to have to send you some Mildura tea, some South Australian tea. Oh.
Yeah, but you'll be a wrong one. I mean, this conversation is closed. I mean, I'm opening to debating all sorts of things. Like we can talk about the relative, we can talk about the relative merits of like assassination or like chemical weapons. These really difficult conversations, and I'll be open and sensitive to what your thoughts might be. But when it comes to tea, mate, you're just wrong.
Yeah, you're going to send an assassination team against me now, eh?
That's it.
And you love this story. I'm just going to throw this story in. When I went to the UK a long time ago, first time I was going back home, I actually took tea from Australia back to the UK with me, and walked through Heathrow, and thought, because being an Australian, you can't bring anything into Australia, as you know. Going into the UK, tracking down a customs guy to actually say, am I okay with tea coming into England? He looked at me like I was absolutely crazy.
Nice.
But I was actually there for quite a while, and that tea came in very handy. I had a suitcase full of tea.
Happy days.
It was.
Good stuff. Anyway,
sorry.
JP,
go for that. Sorry, I just wanted to actually mention Lynn. She's not on at the moment. She'll still be asleep, but she caught a lot of crap the other day from someone in the threads thinking they could judge someone's life. But I just wanted to shout out to Lynn. She's an awesome person who's in your chat every day.
Surprised
really supportive and kind.
Amazing.
So yeah,
yes,
I'm ignoring all my other friends in the chat and just focusing on giving a shout out to Lynn. So yeah.
So I guess the last thing to say with regard to the what's going on in Ukraine at the moment is sorry for repeating myself, but new viewers or whatever, and people forget 80% of what they hear within 24 hours. So repetition is always useful. So it is a grindingly slow offensive at the moment because of all the reasons we talked about, all the mines and the fortifications and this and that. But I get the sense that the screws are tightening for the Ukrainians. And I think the Ukrainians can do so very much, especially if they're given ATACMS and if they're given Taurus. ATACMS and Taurus, I honestly think, the Storm Shadows are a game changer. HIMARS are a game changer. Storm Shadows are a game changer. The ability to hit Ukraine really significant, hit Russia really significantly in Crimea and in the occupied regions is huge. You give them more ability to do that and a systematic degradation of the Russian air defenses, and Crimea becomes untenable without even having to get to the border of Crimea, without even having to get your troops in Crimea. I really do think that the screw is potentially turning for Russia. And if the figures are remotely accurate that the Ukrainian General Staff give in terms of Russian losses on the front lines or behind the front lines, in terms of trucks and fuel tanks, in terms of air defense systems, in terms of artillery systems and tanks and APVs and whatnot, if that is even half correct, then again the screws are turning, and I think Russia doesn't really have much chance. Well, I don't think they ever had a chance of prevailing because I think it's impossible for them to win. And so for me, I've got to the point where it doesn't matter if they don't crazily achieve a territorial gain before Christmas, as long as they are continuing to do what they're doing. And if they get ATACMS and Taurus, that can overcome the need to take territory. Eventually, they will need to take all the territory back. But if they can do all this degradation without having to lose men on the front lines, then it's kind of like a double win. So I've got to a point where I'm a bit like, yeah, I'm not too bothered. It's not moving as quickly as everyone would like, but things are happening. But it does depend on ATACMS and Taurus. So I think to help. Or more Storm Shadows or whatever, and then eventually, F-16s coming on and Gripens coming on. But anyway, what are your thoughts? Just the big picture.
My big picture, Ukraine's going to win. It's going to be the making of Ukraine. It's going to be able to hold its head high for the next 200 years, long after we're gone, because it's going to be the country that defeated Russia. That is what it's going to be, whether it's defeating it by exhausting it, or whether it's defeating it by pushing it all the way out, or whatever, what have you. But it is going to be the country that defeats Russia. And I can't wait for that day. I can't wait until, normal civilians can visit Ukraine without fear of their lives or something now. I mean, I think after this, many people will be very interested in visiting Ukraine, seeing what it's all about.
That reminded me, there's a question. I always talk about this article only because I just think it's still the case. But I wrote back in April last year, where to now, Putin, because there's no way you can win. And I still stand by all of my claims there. It's just a whole year and a half later, and Putin still can't win. It's still, I mean, we don't even really know what his objectives are anymore, which doesn't really help. And now you said there's someone asked me in the thread whether I would ever go to Ukraine. I would love to go to Ukraine.
I'll take you there.
Let's do it. But my only issue is that I am not very mobile, so my MS means
I'm aware of that. As I've said, I've got a best friend who has MS. Well aware of all the travel problems. I'll take you, JP.
Yeah, my walking's not great, but I'm well up for it. Let's do it.
I'll carry you. You'll be on my back. So I have to get fit for it, but
my walking's a little bit up and down. But when I go just not very far to my local pub and my local friends, we go together. Drinking an MS really doesn't go very well, and I'm quite often brought back between two guys, like strong arming me back, and it allows me to kind of half walk. I have what's called foot drop, and I can't just lift my legs very well. But anyway, I would love to go to Ukraine. I think I might set that as one of my having got so invested in this war and the future of Ukraine and the people there, I'd absolutely love to do that. So maybe yeah JR,
Yep.
let's do it, guys. Let's go.
Let's go.
ATP convoy. Yeah. I used to play rugby. I used to play a sport called ultimate frisbee as well, weirdly, at university. I went to World Beach Championships. Anyway, my nickname, my ultimate name was Convoy, but anyway, there you go. Right, just random things you don't need to know. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it, which is our future trip to Ukraine to have a ATP party. Let's do it.
No, seriously, when the war ends, pick a date, everyone get there if they can, and anyone that can't, we'll live stream you in a big group where we're all celebrating together.
Oh, this sounds amazing. Brilliant stuff. Excellent. Let's make this a reality, guys. But of course, in order for that to be a reality, Ukraine needs to prevail, and they need to prevail as quickly as possible, before I'm in a wheelchair. So, that's what has to happen.
I'll push the wheelchair.
Okay. Nice.
All right, then.
Okay, well, look, thank you so much to all the very, very generous people in the live chat. Thanks to the people who have become members today. I don't know if people gifted memberships. It's really hard for me to see that on this interface. But Gary Rollinson, thank you. Killer Drone for being a member. Brian Ivy, Eubanks DVDs. Louise Foley. Did I not mention Louise Foley? Another good one. G'day from Western Australia. Sorry, Louise.
Louise is somewhere down the road from me.
There you go.
Hang on, and
sorry,
apparently
Louise.
So is Oz Quokka, and he's from Perth because of Quokka soccer.
Yeah, well, quite why so many of you guys are up so late, I don't know. But anyway, Eubanks DVD, Smith, thank you, Louise Foley, Celestial Veggie, Robert Pitt, Mark Bizq, Julian Rossiter, really appreciate that, Julian, and Orkney Trike Tours for joining as a new member. So thank you, everyone.
Orkney
really
is
cool.
so beautiful. Have you been there, JP?
No, I haven't done an Orkney. My mate is a helicopter. He was in the armed forces as a helicopter pilot, and he now flies air sea rescue in the Shetland Islands, which is nearish.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Don't go to Scotland and say that, but yeah.
Yeah. It's all the same.
All right,
it's all the same.
I'll disappear. I'll shut up now. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much. And if we do this again, it'll be amazing if you can help out. It really does help. So thanks.
Certainly.
Cool beans. Okay. Well, thanks everyone else. Take care, everybody, and have a good Friday. And I'll speak to you. May not be later today. It might be tomorrow now. But take care, everyone. All the very best. And of course, toodle pips.